My name's Emily, I'm 29, and I live in Chicago. By day, I run a boutique catering company that's grown faster than I ever imagined. But beneath my ambition, I've always been too trusting, especially when it comes to family. That flaw nearly destroyed me the night my in-laws decided to humiliate me. They sneered across the table, calling me a nobody, a useless girl with no future. But the waiter's words left them pale, and me victorious. If you're watching, please like and subscribe. It helps more than you know. Has anyone ever underestimated you or tried to strip away your worth? Please share in the comments where you're watching from and how you've proven them wrong. I'd love to hear your story. The sting of that dinner still lingers in my chest, but to explain it, I need to start with the weeks leading up to it. I wasn't just meeting my fiancé's family for a nice meal. I was stepping into a storm I didn't even know existed. Chicago winters have a way of sneaking into your bones. That evening, as I pulled my wool coat tighter, I remember telling myself to breathe. Ethan, my fiancé, squeezed my hand as we walked toward the restaurant. "You'll be fine," he whispered. "They'll love you once they know you." But the way his jaw tightened told me he wasn't entirely convinced. Ethan's family was traditional, to put it mildly, old money, country club types. His father, Richard, ran a law firm that had been in the family for 3 generations. His mother, Marjorie, chaired every charity board within a 20-mile radius. His sister, Victoria, was married to a surgeon, and then there was me. The girl who started with nothing but a second-hand food truck and a dream. I've always believed that kindness could win people over, that if I just smiled enough, worked hard enough, showed respect, then anyone would respect me back. But some people don't see kindness as a virtue. They see it as a weakness. And that night, I was about to learn that lesson in the harshest way possible. Ethan had chosen one of the most exclusive restaurants downtown. Chandeliers glittered above white tablecloths, and waiters in crisp uniforms glided silently between tables. "Just remember," Ethan murmured as we approached the host stand, "don't let them rattle you." I forced a smile, but inside, nerves twisted like a knot. The host led us to a private dining room, where his parents and sister already waited. The moment I stepped in, their eyes swept over me, calculating, unimpressed. Marjorie didn't bother standing. She just raised one perfectly arched brow and said, "So this is Emily." Richard smirked, sipping his wine. "She looks younger than I expected." Victoria gave me a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Waitressing must keep you on your feet." Heat rushed to my face. Ethan had told them I owned a catering business, but the way they said waitressing made it sound like I was scraping plates in some diner. I forced a polite laugh and sat down. "Actually, I run my own company." "Oh, how quaint," Marjorie cut in, her tone dripping with dismissal. The courses began arriving, each more extravagant than the last. Lobster bisque, truffle risotto, filet mignon. But the food felt like cardboard in my mouth, because every time I opened my mouth, another barb was waiting. "So, Emily," Richard said casually, "do you plan to keep cooking after the wedding, or will Ethan be taking care of you?" Ethan shifted uncomfortably. "Dad." But I swallowed and answered softly, "I plan to expand." "We just signed our 3rd corporate client," Victoria snorted. "Corporate? You mean office parties?" The table laughed. My cheeks burned. By the 3rd course, I stopped trying to defend myself. I just nodded, smiled, and let their words pierce me. Each jab felt like a needle. You must be exhausted running deliveries yourself. Ethan always had a thing for simpler girls. Imagine, marrying into our family with no degree, no pedigree. They thought I was nobody, and in their eyes, I was. But what they didn't know, what none of them could have guessed, was that the very ground they sat on, the restaurant they were dining in, the chef they praised, belonged to me. And the waiter who approached, with his silver tray and practiced smile, was about to prove it. When I replay that night in my mind, it feels almost surreal. The laughter, the polished silverware, the weight of judgment pressing down on me. But to truly understand why their words cut so deeply, you need to know where I came from and what it took to get there. I wasn't born into money, not even close. I grew up in a small 2-bedroom house in Joliet, Illinois, with a roof that leaked every spring and heating that rattled like an old train in winter. My mom worked double shifts at a diner, and my dad fixed cars until his back gave out. We didn't take vacations. We didn't dine at fancy restaurants. But what we did have was grit. When I was 12, I started helping Mom in the kitchen. By 15, I was running the fryer on weekends, saving every dollar I could. While other kids were shopping at the mall, I was counting tips and sketching recipes in a beat-up notebook. I didn't have much, but I had ambition. And ambition, when you have nothing else, can be dangerous. After high school, college wasn't in the cards. Not financially, anyway. I worked 3 jobs, server, barista, and line cook, until I scraped enough to buy a used food truck. It was dented and rusted, but it was mine. I painted it myself, a bold red with my logo. Emily's Table, food that feels like home. At first, I sold simple comfort food. Mac and cheese, grilled cheese, soups. But people kept coming back, not just for the food, but for the way I treated them. I remembered names, remembered stories. People felt seen. That's how it started. 1 truck, 1 block. But soon demand grew. I hired 2 employees, then 5. Within 4 years, I wasn't just running a food truck. I had a catering company serving weddings, corporate events, and even city galas. That's when Ethan walked into my life. Literally. He walked up to my truck one windy afternoon, tie flapping in the breeze, his briefcase banging against his knee. He ordered a grilled cheese and tomato soup. He came back the next day. And the next, soon, it wasn't about food anymore. He'd linger, asking about my day, my plans, my dreams. I was wary at first. Ethan was from a world I didn't belong to, but he wasn't like his family. He was kind, thoughtful, the kind of man who rolled up his sleeves to help me haul crates or wash dishes after a big event. When he proposed 2 years later, I said yes without hesitation. But what I didn't realize was that saying yes to him meant stepping into a world that would never see me as enough. The first time I met his parents, it was a quick brunch at their country club. I remember Marjorie's pearls, Richard's gold watch, the way Victoria arrived late, heels clicking like she owned the place. At first, they were polite. Distant, but polite. I thought maybe I was imagining the slight curve of Marjorie's lip when I mentioned my food truck beginnings, or the way Victoria laughed when I said I was self-taught. But then I noticed how their compliments were always edged with condescension. That's adorable, Emily. You really run it all by yourself? How quaint. A business built on sandwiches. Ethan would squeeze my hand under the table, silently telling me to stay calm. I told myself they'd come around eventually, but the cracks only grew deeper. When Ethan and I announced our engagement, I braced myself for criticism. And sure enough, it came. Richard asked bluntly, "Can you provide for a family on catering?" Marjorie sighed, saying, "It's just not the kind of background we imagined for Ethan." Victoria smirked. "Well, at least she can handle the wedding food herself." Ethan defended me every time, but I hate. And when I stepped into that glittering dining room, under chandeliers that sparkled like frozen stars, their eyes sliced into me like knives, I told myself to smile, to stay calm, to win them over with Victoria. But I had no idea the words. Nobody were waiting for me, ready to turn that dinner into the moment that would change everything. The clinking of crystal glasses filled the private dining room. Everything about the space screamed exclusivity. Velvet chairs, fresh orchids on each table, gold-plated cutlery that felt too heavy in my hands. But none of it weighed on me as much as the eyes of the people sitting across from me. Richard, Marjorie, and Victoria weren't just evaluating my dress or my posture. They were measuring my worth, and I already knew their verdict. The waiter poured champagne, his movements flawless. As he moved away, Marjorie leaned back in her chair, pearls glinting under the chandelier. "So, Emily," she began, her tone laced with sugar that didn't sweeten a thing. "Ethan tells us you—" "Cook," I swallowed, forcing a polite smile. Yes, I run a catering company. Richard chuckled, interrupting me. So, like sandwiches and salads? For office luncheons? The knot in my stomach tightened. Not just that. We've expanded to corporate events, weddings, even galas. Victoria smirked, swirling her wine. Oh, how charming. Like a personal chef. But for crowds, their laughter followed, quiet but sharp. Ethan shifted uncomfortably beside me, his jaw tightening. He tried to cut in. Her business isn't just food, Dad. She built it from scratch. 3 trucks, a staff of 15. But Marjorie waved her hand as if brushing off crumbs. Yes, yes, darling, but you must understand. It's hard to compare frying chicken cutlets to managing a law firm or performing surgery. I froze, my fork hovering above my plate. Victoria added, her tone dripping with mock concern. But you do make your own hours, right? So at least Ethan won't starve if you're too busy to cook at home. I laughed lightly, though my cheeks burned. Something like that. The appetizers arrived. Lobster bisque with delicate herb garnishes. I lifted my spoon carefully, but the taste barely registered. My mind spun with their words. Richard leaned in. Tell me, Emily, do you plan to keep catering after the wedding, or will Ethan provide for you? My chest tightened. I plan to expand, actually. We've just signed with a major corporate client downtown. Victoria snorted into her glass. Oh, an office party. That's adorable. The table chuckled again. Ethan muttered, That's not fair. Richard ignored him. It's just, Ethan comes from a certain standard. We want to make sure you can rise to it. The implication was clear. I didn't belong at their table, much less in their family. Somehow the conversation turned toward childhood stories. Victoria reminisced about summers in Europe, sailing lessons, and the family ski lodge in Aspen. Marjorie turned to me, eyes sharp. And what about you, Emily? Where did your family vacation? My throat tightened. We didn't really vacation much. My mom worked long shifts at a diner. My dad was a mechanic. Richard raised a brow. Ah, blue collar. Victoria smirked. Explains the hands-on career choice. I clenched my fists under the tablecloth. Ethan whispered, Emily, you don't have to. But I forced a smile, my voice steady. Yes, blue collar. But they taught me grit, and that grit built my company. For a moment, silence hung in the air. Then Marjorie let out a soft laugh, shaking her head. So romantic, isn't it? Pulling yourself up by your apron strings. By the time the main course arrived, filet mignon with truffle butter, I was raw inside. Every word was another needle, pricking deeper. Victoria cut into her steak and asked sweetly, Do you even eat at places like this, Emily? Or is this a first? The table laughed again. I gripped my knife so tightly my knuckles whitened. I've been here before, I said evenly. Richard smirked. Really? As a guest? Or as staff? The laugh that followed was loud, cruel. My heart pounded, my ears burned. Ethan finally slammed his fork down. Enough. His voice was low but firm. She doesn't deserve this. The room fell quiet for a beat. But then Marjorie sighed, as though he were a child throwing a tantrum. Ethan, we're only teasing. She needs thicker skin if she's going to survive in our world. Victoria added, Honestly, it's for her own good. I sat frozen, my appetite gone, every nerve screaming. They weren't teasing. They were dismantling me, piece by piece. And worst of all, I'd let them. But as the waiter returned with another bottle of wine, his eyes flicked toward me knowingly, almost reassuringly. Because what my in-laws didn't know, what none of them realized, was that their cruelty was about to backfire spectacularly, and I wouldn't have to lift a finger to expose them. The meal dragged on like a trial, and I was the defendant. Every question was a cross-examination. Every laugh a verdict against me. By dessert, my guard was cracking. The crème brûlée sat untouched in front of me, its golden crust glinting under the chandelier. My stomach was too knotted to even consider breaking it. Marjorie dabbed her lips with a linen napkin, eyes sharp. So, Emily, she said softly, Where do you see yourself in 5 years? It sounded like a job interview, except the stakes were higher. I steadied my voice. Running a national catering brand. Expanding into more states. Providing jobs, creating opportunities, Richard snorted. Ambitious. His fork clinked against his plate. But ambition doesn't equal success. You need a pedigree. And frankly, he glanced at Marjorie. We're not sure you fit. Victoria leaned in, her voice honeyed but cruel. Honestly, Emily, let's be real. To our circles, you're nobody. The word hung in the air, slicing sharper than any knife on the table. Nobody. My chest tightened. My throat burned. I forced myself not to flinch, not to cry. Ethan's jaw clenched, his fist tightening around his napkin. Victoria, but she cut him off, smirking. Don't be so dramatic, Ethan. We're only being honest. Marjorie chuckled, tapping her pearls. Oh, don't look so offended, dear. We just mean society has its levels. We're at one. You're at another. There's no shame in that. Richard lifted his wine glass in a mock toast. To honesty. Their laughter filled the room, echoing in my head like cruel bells. I sat frozen, my face carefully blank. Inside, though, something snapped. Nobody. I had built something from nothing. I had clawed my way up with grit and sleepless nights, tears and risk. And yet, to them, I was invisible. Ethan slammed his palm on the table, startling the entire room. Glasses rattled. Enough! His voice thundered, his face flushed. Emily is everything you pretend to admire. Driven, successful, strong. And you sit here tearing her down? You're pathetic. The table fell silent. Marjorie blinked in shock. Richard stiffened, his jaw tight. Victoria looked like she'd swallowed a lemon, but then slowly, Richard smirked. Son, if you're this emotional over a nobody, maybe you're not ready to take over the firm after all. Ethan froze, his face paling. They had turned his defense into a weapon, and I realized this wasn't just about me. It was about control, about keeping Ethan under their thumb. I lifted my champagne glass slowly, my hand steady despite the storm raging inside me. I smiled, a sharp, dangerous smile. Thank you, I whispered. Marjorie tilted her head, confused. For what, dear? I met her eyes, holding her gaze with unflinching calm. For reminding me exactly who I am, and exactly who you'll never see coming. The table fell quiet, unease flickering across their polished faces. Because though they didn't know it yet, the real dinner was just beginning. I didn't sleep that night. Back at our apartment, I sat in the dark living room long after Ethan had gone to bed. The city lights outside blinked like distant stars, cold and unreachable. Nobody. The word echoed inside me like a curse. I pressed my palms to my face, but the tears kept spilling. It wasn't just the insult, it was the way they'd said it with such certainty, as though my entire existence could be reduced to a single cruel word. And the worst part? A tiny, poisonous voice inside me whispered, what if they're right? I wasn't born into money. I didn't grow up with connections or influence. Everything I had, I'd built from scratch. But sitting at that table, surrounded by wealth and entitlement, I felt like a child pretending to belong. Ethan found me on the couch around 2 a.m. He rubbed his eyes, his voice low. Emily, come to bed, please. I can't, I whispered. He sat beside me, wrapping an arm around my shoulders. They're wrong. You know that, right? I shook my head. Do I? Ethan, what if I am dragging you down? His grip tightened. Stop! Don't let them poison you. You're the strongest person I know. But his words slid off like rain on glass, because deep down, I didn't believe them yet. The days that followed blurred. I went through motions at work, smiling at clients, tasting sauces, approving menus. But inside, I was hollow. Friends texted, but I left messages unread. My staff noticed the difference too. You okay, boss? Marcus, my head chef, asked one night. Fine, I lied. But my reflection in the stainless steel counter betrayed me. Sunken eyes, brittle smile. The final crack came a week later. Ethan's parents invited us again, for brunch this time. I said no. Ethan went without me. Alone in our apartment, I stared at the invitation lying on the counter. Gold embossed, elegant, smug. Something inside me snapped. I grabbed the invitation, tore it to shreds, and collapsed to the floor. I sobbed, loud, ugly sobs that echoed off the walls. For the first time in years, I felt powerless. That night, curled on the floor, I whispered to the empty room, "Maybe I'm nothing." But then, through swollen eyes, I noticed something. A framed photo on the bookshelf. It was from the day I opened my restaurant. I, standing in front of the doors, scissors in hand, surrounded by staff who believed in me. My smile then was real. My eyes are alive. I stared at that version of myself. That woman was not nothing. She had built something out of sweat, fear, and courage. She had fought to survive in a cutthroat industry. She had created jobs, inspired loyalty, and earned respect. And now? Now she was letting people who lived off old money and arrogance tell her who she was? No, I sat up, wiping my tears with shaky hands. My voice trembled, but it was firm. "I won't stay broken," I whispered. The words echoed in the silence, gaining strength. I repeated them louder. "I won't stay broken." For the first time since that dinner, my chest felt lighter, because I realized something important. If they wanted to see me as nobody, I'd show them just how wrong they were, but not with words. With action. With proof. I stood walking into the kitchen, flicking on the lights. The restaurant keys lay on the counter, glinting. My hands curled around them. An idea, sharp, dangerous, and thrilling, began to form. The kind of idea that could turn humiliation into power. And I knew. My in-laws would never see it coming. The morning after my breakdown, I woke with swollen eyes and a mind buzzing with clarity. I'd spent too long letting their voices drown out my own. That ended now. If my in-laws thought I was nobody, then I would use their blindness against them. Because when people underestimate you, they leave openings. And I was about to step through every single one. The first thing I did was secure my restaurant. I met with my lawyer, Ms. Chen, in her downtown office. She adjusted her glasses, scanning documents. "Emily, you're already incorporated, but if you're serious about keeping outsiders from meddling, we'll tighten your legal protections. Ironclad." "Do it," I said. She gave me a sharp look. "Planning something?" I only smiled. "Let's just say, I won't be anyone's nobody again." That night, I called Marcus, my head chef, into my office after closing. He leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. "Boss, what's going on?" "You've been different." I hesitated, then told him everything. The dinner, the insult, the spiral. His jaw tightened. "They really said that? To you?" I nodded. Marcus leaned forward. "Then let's remind them who you are." I grinned faintly. "Exactly. But I need information first, discreetly. What do you know about Ethan's family business dealings?" Marcus blinked. "You're not just planning a clapback dinner, are you?" "No," I said, my voice low. "I'm planning a reckoning." For weeks, I worked in silence. On the surface, I ran my restaurant as usual. But behind the scenes, I was gathering strings. I spoke with the suppliers Ethan's family used. I met quietly with mutual acquaintances. I dug into their business, flaws, debts, vulnerabilities. The more I uncovered, the more I realized how fragile their empire really was. Flashy wealth, yes, but beneath it, cracks. Lawsuits waiting to happen, investments teetering, and me? I had allies who owed me favors. Friends in hospitality, real estate, and even finance. People who believed in me. One by one, I pulled them closer. Ethan noticed, of course. One evening, as we ate takeout on the couch, he asked softly, "Emily, what are you planning?" I put down my chopsticks, meeting his eyes. "Do you trust me?" I asked. "Always," he said without hesitation. "Then don't ask too many questions. Just be ready when I tell you it's time." He studied me for a long moment, then nodded. "Whatever it is, I'm with you." I knew I couldn't strike recklessly. No, it had to be calculated, public, irrefutable. So I started with an invitation. I mailed Ethan's family a formal embossed card, on thick paper, elegant script. It looked like an invitation to a private event at my restaurant. They wouldn't know yet what awaited them, because this time I wasn't walking into their territory. They'd be stepping into mine. The night I dropped the invitations in the mailbox, my hands trembled, not with fear, but with anticipation. As the envelope slipped from my fingers, I whispered, "Let's see who the real nobody is." And for the first time since that awful dinner, I felt not broken, but powerful. The invitations had been sent. Thick, heavy cards with gilded edges, impossible to ignore. I could almost picture my mother-in-law's smug face softening into confusion as she read my name embossed across the bottom. Hosted by Emily Carter. But this wasn't just about a single dinner. No, this was about laying groundwork, testing pressure points, and watching them squirm before the final blow. Before the big event, I had to take back control of the story, so I reached out to a well-known food blogger who had once written a glowing review of my restaurant. "Emily," she exclaimed when I called. "I've been meaning to feature you again. What's new?" I leaned back in my chair, my voice calm but deliberate. "I'm planning a private event soon. Very exclusive. But before that, I'd like a little feature. Just to remind people who I am." I forced a small smile. "Funny you mention that. I've been busy planning an event. You'll see the invite soon," she smirked. "An event? What kind of event could you possibly host?" I leaned in slightly, lowering my voice just enough to stir curiosity. "One you won't want to miss," her smirk faltered just a little. That flicker of doubt? That was my first win. That night, Ethan confronted me in our bedroom. "Emily," he said quietly, "I know you're planning something, but are you sure this is the right way? My family, they can be ruthless." I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at my reflection in the mirror. "They already were ruthless, Ethan. To me. To us. This isn't just about payback, it's about reclaiming my dignity. If I don't do this, I'll never forgive myself." He sighed, sitting beside me. "I just don't want to lose you in the process." I touched his hand. "You won't, but they're about to lose everything they think they own." The weekend before the event, I hosted a smaller private dinner at the restaurant. Just a handful of influential friends and industry contacts. I needed to test the flow, the menu, the ambiance, the impact. As the final dessert course was served, one of the guests raised a glass. "To Emily," she said warmly, "the woman who built this from nothing. You're unstoppable." The table erupted in applause. "And me?" I just sat there soaking in the validation. This wasn't the grand revenge yet, but it was proof. Proof that my voice, my presence carried weight. But just when I thought everything was going smoothly, Marcus pulled me aside in the kitchen. "Emily," he said, his voice low. "One of the waiters overheard something. Your in-laws. They know you've invited them, and they're planning to embarrass you. Publicly." My stomach dropped. "How?" "They're bringing guests. Influential ones. They think they can outshine you on your own turf." I clenched my fists, heat rising to my cheeks. Of course, they'd try to turn the tables. Marcus looked at me, worry etched in his features. "What are you going to do?" I exhaled slowly, the flicker of fear transforming into steel. "What I always do," I said firmly. "Adapt, and make sure they regret ever underestimating me." That night, I stood in the middle of my empty dining room, staring at the polished tables set for the coming showdown. I whispered to myself, voice steady, "They think they're walking into a dinner to mock me again. But what they don't know is, they're walking straight into my trap." And for the first time, I felt the tide turning. The night of the dinner arrived, and my restaurant had never looked more radiant. Golden lights cascaded down the walls. Strings of crystal hung from chandeliers, scattering diamonds of light across polished mahogany tables. A string quartet tuned their instruments in the corner, their soft notes weaving anticipation into the air. I stood in the kitchen doorway, taking it all in. The place smelled of roasted duck, truffle butter, and fresh herbs. Everything was perfect, down to the last wine glass gleaming under candlelight. And yet, beneath my calm exterior, my pulse hammered. This was the night. At precisely 7 p.m., they arrived. My in-laws. Their polished shoes clicked against the marble floor, their laughter echoing through the entrance like a conquering army. My mother-in-law, H., wore a glittering emerald gown, her chin tilted high. My father-in-law, Richard, adjusted his cufflinks as though he owned the very air in the room. Trailing behind them was Victoria, my sister-in-law with her ever-present smirk, and a cluster of their wealthy friends. The very influential guests Marcus had warned me about. Marjorie's gaze swept the room before landing on me. Her lips curled. "Well," she drawled, "this is quaint." Her friends chuckled. I swallowed hard, but instead of shrinking, I smiled. "I'm glad you could make it. Dinner is about to be served." The waiters moved like clockwork, serving the first course, lobster bisque in porcelain bowls, garnished with saffron. As guests murmured approval, Marjorie leaned toward her friend. Loud enough for me to hear, she sneered, "Not bad for a waitress." My fists clenched at my sides. But I didn't bite. Not yet. Instead, I signaled Marcus. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, his voice carrying across the room, "our host has prepared something special tonight. Between courses, we'll share stories of passion, resilience, and vision." I stepped forward, forcing my voice steady. "This restaurant isn't just food on a plate. It's a dream built brick by brick. A reminder that no one can define your worth." "But you," the room quieted. Eyes turned toward me, and for the first time, I saw uncertainty flicker across Marjorie's face. The second course arrived, roast duck glazed with orange reduction. But before anyone could take a bite, Marcus returned, carrying a small folder. "Some of you may not know the full story," he said smoothly. "This establishment isn't just a restaurant. It's the headquarters of a growing hospitality group." He handed the folder to me, and I opened it with deliberate care. Inside were contracts, expansions, investor letters, all with my name at the top. Gasps rippled through the room as I laid them out on the center table. "This," I said, voice steady, "isn't just a dining room. It's an empire in the making. And I am its founder and CEO." A stunned silence fell. Marjorie's glass slipped from her fingers, shattering on the floor. Richard recovered first, his voice booming. "This is nonsense. She's exaggerating, fabricating. Do you really expect us to believe—" But before he could finish, the doors opened again. Ms. Chen, my lawyer, stepped in, holding another document. She crossed the room, heels clicking, and placed it before Richard. "This," she said firmly, "is a legal notice. Your company's debts, your falsified filings, and your risky dealings. They're all here, and I've ensured the right people have copies." Gasps echoed again. Guests exchanged nervous glances. Richard's face drained of color. "You, how dare you?" Marjorie grabbed his arm, panic flashing in her eyes. And then it happened. One of their wealthy friends, a man who had once ignored me entirely, cleared his throat. "Emily, I had no idea you were behind all this." "Truly impressive," another chimed in. "Extraordinary vision. We should talk about partnerships." Suddenly, the tide had turned. The same people who once sneered now leaned toward me with admiration, and my in-laws. They sat frozen, their carefully constructed facade crumbling before their very eyes. I felt Ethan's hand slip into mine under the table. He whispered, his voice trembling with emotion, "I've never been more proud of you." Tears threatened to well up, but I blinked them away. This wasn't the time to soften. Instead, I straightened my shoulders and addressed the room. For years, I was called nobody. Tonight, I stand before you as someone who refused to stay small. Success is not given. It's built. And I built this. Applause erupted. Real, thunderous applause. And in that moment, I knew. I had won. But as the applause died down, Marjorie leaned forward, her voice low and venomous. And then came the financial blow. Richard's risky investments, the ones Ms. Chen had exposed, came crashing down. By the end of the week, word spread that his company was hemorrhaging money. One evening, as Ethan and I locked up the restaurant, a black car pulled up. Marjorie stepped out, her emerald scarf fluttering in the wind. Her eyes were hollow, but her voice still dripped venom. "You've ruined us," she spat. I held her gaze. "No, Marjorie. You ruined yourself. All I did was show the truth," she laughed bitterly. "Truth? You think your little empire will protect you? You'll learn soon enough, when the same people applauding you turn their knives on you." I felt Ethan tense beside me, but I raised a hand to stop him. "I'm not afraid of knives anymore," I said quietly. Marjorie's smirk faltered for the first time. She turned sharply, slid into the car, and disappeared into the night. For all the satisfaction of exposing them, I wasn't prepared for the emotional aftermath. That night, I sat in bed staring at the ceiling, my body heavy with exhaustion. Ethan curled beside me, whispering, "You did it." "You stood up to them. But victory has a strange taste." It was sharp sweet, and yet lonely. Because beneath the triumph, I still mourned the simple acceptance I once craved. I had wanted them to see me, not as a waitress, not as nobody, but as their daughter-in-law, worthy of respect. Instead, I had crushed them. The following week, Marcus found me in the kitchen, sitting alone with a cooling cup of coffee. "You look like someone stole your crown," he said, sliding into the chair across from me. I sighed. "I don't know, Marcus. I thought winning would feel cleaner." "But it doesn't." He leaned forward, eyes steady. "Because you're not like them. You wanted justice, not destruction. But sometimes, to reclaim yourself, you have to burn down the old." His words sank into me, heavy but true. A few days later, a letter arrived. Not from Marjorie or Richard, but from Victoria. The handwriting was shaky, rushed. "Emily, I don't know what to say. I laughed with them. I mocked you. And now everything's falling apart. I don't know where to turn. I'm sorry. I read it twice, my heart tightening. Part of me wanted to shred it, to throw her words back into the void. But another part, the old Emily, felt the weight of her desperation. I set the letter down, unresolved. Forgiveness was not something I owed, but it was something I'd have to face. By the end of the month, the dust began to settle. Ethan's parents had retreated into silence, their social empire crumbling. Victoria kept her distance, save for that one fragile letter. And me? I poured my energy into the restaurant. Business boomed. Staff morale soared. Every evening, as I watched diners raise glasses under the golden chandeliers, I felt more like myself, whole. But deep inside, I knew there was still one more chapter left. Not for revenge, not for applause, but for closure, because I had reclaimed my power, but what I did with it would define who I became next. One evening, as the sun bled red across the horizon, Ethan sat beside me on the balcony of our apartment. He touched my hand gently. "Emily, what happens now?" I looked out at the glowing city, my voice steady. "Now," I whispered, "I decide if the story ends with vengeance or with freedom." The choice hung heavy in the air, waiting for me to step into it, and I knew part 10 would be my answer. The weeks after the dinner felt like stepping into a new life. Each morning, I opened my eyes not to dread, but to possibility. My restaurant thrived. Reservations are booked months in advance. Articles praised me as an entrepreneur who had turned humiliation into triumph. But success wasn't just measured in profits or headlines. It was in the quiet moments, watching my staff laugh together before service, feeling Ethan's hand steady in mine, hearing customers call me boss with genuine respect. For the first time in years, I no longer felt like an outsider in my own story. One chilly evening, a knock sounded at my door. When I opened it, Victoria stood there. Her eyes were red, her hair unkempt, and her voice trembled. "Emily, please, can we talk?" I hesitated. Old anger clawed at me. Memories of her laughter at the dinner, of her cruel smirks. But behind her eyes, I saw something different now. fear, regret. We sat in the living room, the silence thick. Finally, she whispered, I was wrong. I went along with them because it was easier. But seeing you stand up there owning that room, it made me realize how small I've been living. Her voice cracked. I'm sorry. I took a long breath. Forgiveness wasn't simple. It wasn't about erasing what she had done. It was about releasing myself from the weight of it. I don't know if I can forget, I said quietly, but I can move forward. And so can you. Tears rolled down her cheeks, but for the first time she smiled. I never saw Marjorie or Richard again in person. Word spread that they'd sold off properties to cover debts. Their names slipped from social circles like whispers dying in the wind. For so long, I had dreamed of this moment, the day they'd be brought low. And yes, there was satisfaction, but also emptiness, because revenge gives fire, but not peace. Peace, I realized, was something I had to choose. One night, after closing the restaurant, Ethan and I walked through the empty dining room. The chandeliers glowed faintly, casting pools of golden light. He stopped, turning to me. Emily, do you see what you've done? You turned their cruelty into a kingdom. I smiled softly. Not a kingdom. A home. For me. For everyone who was ever told they were nothing. I thought of the young waitress I used to be, the one shrinking under their laughter, desperate for approval. She was gone now. In her place stood a woman who had carved her own place in the world. Weeks later, another letter came. This time from Marjorie. It was short, cold. You've ruined everything. We'll never forgive you. I stared at the words, then slowly folded the paper and set it aside. For the first time, I didn't feel the need to respond. Their forgiveness no longer mattered, because the only approval I needed was my own. On the anniversary of the restaurant's opening, I hosted a celebration. Staff, friends, investors, all under one roof, glasses raised in joy. As I stood at the head of the room, I felt the weight of the journey behind me. Betrayal, shock, pain, determination, revenge. And now, empowerment. I lifted my glass. To everyone who's ever been called nobody, may you rise so high that even those who doubted you can no longer reach your shadow. The room erupted in cheers, and as I looked around, I knew. This was the ending I had built with my own hands. Not theirs. Mine. If this story touched you, please like and subscribe. It helps more than you know. Would you forgive betrayal like this or walk away forever? Tell me in the comments. I'd love to hear your thoughts.